And I sat there holding my pastor's wife's hand, and I just had tears rolling down my face. It felt so humiliating. And I can remember my doctor looking at me, and she said, I can't even imagine your husband doing this. He was so attentive with all your appointments and at delivery. And, she was just as shocked as I was. And it's that moment of discovery that stands in your mind forever. And it's kind of that time where you remember before D-Day and then what after D-Day. That's always kind of the time frame where you categorize your life, So for me, mine was July 12th, 2007.
Wow.
So,
we have a little bit in common, the depression. My husband was just this black cloud was over him all the time. And the fact that I had no idea. And did you find yourself doubting yourself? I mean, you didn't even notice.
You doubt, how could I have been so stupid? How could I have not known this? What were the signs? I mean, I can remember that night we paced the kitchen for probably 3 hours, and I just was asking all these questions like, well, how did you pull this off? When would you meet with her? How did you communicate? Like all these questions that just in my brain, it didn't even make sense that this could be possible, or that this could be the man that I was married to. And this was the Sunday school teacher and the guy, collecting the offering at church and being on the leadership team. It's just all these things that your reality, you can't grasp what the reality is in that moment. And so then it was the journey after that of starting counseling. And back in 2007, I think it was my very first appointment individually. The counselor, who was a CSAT, looked at me and he said, addicts marry addicts. You are what we call a co-addict. And I am going to recommend that you start a 12-step of codependency group.
Jeez. How did that feel?
It was one of those out-of-body experiences. I thought, what am I a co-addict of? And I had never even heard the term codependency. And to just be labeled that, it made me feel like I was taking part of the blame, that I was somehow responsible for enabling him to act out and to keep this secret. And that was standard of care back in 2007. That's what the sexual addiction world knew. Back then, they did not understand betrayal trauma. I never heard the term betrayal trauma. I never heard a word like abuse, integrity abuse. We were in marriage counseling. So I would go to my individual counseling. We would do marriage counseling. And I would do my group therapy for the 12 steps of codependency. And we did that for 2 years. And it was exhausting. And then there was another relapse.
Hey there. Welcome to Where to Find Bread, Season 2, Episode 5. I am so glad you're here. Although you may not have guessed it from our last 4 episodes, we have been talking about how when our best laid plans for life fail, we still get to choose our values and our path forward, even though nothing has turned out the way that it seemed. Stay tuned. We're getting there. Where to Find Bread exists to share information and strategies that my husband, the professor, and I learned on our path to recovery. So if you are in the same boat, you don't have to travel this hard path all alone. Episode 1 laid the groundwork from season 1's transition from my life that I was dedicated to doing to one of dedicated to being and surviving big trauma. In episode 2, I shared my story of now 44 years of a marriage where my husband had been hiding behind a mask to conceal his sexual addiction and intimacy anorexia. If you haven't yet, Go watch episode 3, where he talks about things from his perspective before I discovered his double life. In episode 4, we talked to a therapist, Jenny Bacon, who introduced us to the concept of a sex addict's secret sexual basement and the hidden iceberg. She gave us a wealth of information and knowledge about the process of recovery and much more. This week, we turn to the issues that betrayal raises for the partners of those who betray them. And we bring on a woman whose mission it is to help partners, Bridget Greger. Welcome, Bridget.
Thank you, Teri. It's so good to be here.
Oh, it's great to have you. Bridget is a clarity coach. She works with partners of betrayers exclusively. Her goal, according to her website, is to move people forward from where you are to where you want to be, building a vision, growing, healing, gaining confidence, and learning to regulate your thoughts and emotions. That's great. How did you prepare for that? I'm curious, what was your past life in business, Bridget? What did you do?
So I actually was a business and psychology major in college, and
Yeah.
I spent my career in sales. So I have spent over 20 years in sales, pharmaceutical sales, and then through life's circumstances, I have made the transition to be a life coach, a clarity coach. So a few years ago, I went back to school, and I went through the Professional Christian Coaching Institute and took classes online and just transitioned the skill set that I used in sales to life coaching and to clarity coaching.
Excellent. And you've also done some training with apsats, and my listeners will remember that's the Association of Partners of Sex Addicts and Trauma Specialists. You completed the multidimensional partner trauma model training. What is that?
Yes. So I'll back up a little bit. As far as coaching, the worldwide standards of coaching is to be ICF credentialed. So it's the International Coaching Federation. So it's just important as you're looking for a coach to make sure that they do have the standards that have been set. It's
Hmm.
a lot of mentor coaching and just more hours to make sure that you're meeting those standards. So the APSATS training is in addition to that. To be an APSATS trained coach, you do have to have that ICF credentialing. So I am certified through Professional Christian Coaching Institute. I am credentialed through the International Coaching Federation. And then I am getting my APSATS training, which is I will be a certified partner coach. And so currently I've done the training model, which is the multi partner trauma model. And then right now I'm currently working on all the supervision hours that are required for that.
Okay. Well, last week I asked Jenny Bacon, how did a nice girl like you get interested in the field of sex addiction? Why don't you tell us your story?
Yeah, it's not one that many women will ever want to be a part of. Um, I went to a Christian college and met my husband there at that Christian college. And he was a Bible major at the time. And, I thought I was doing all the right things, all the things that you learn to do, that you're taught as a Christian is to look for a mate that's dedicated to the Lord, that wants to walk with you through life. And that's what I thought I had done. We got married in 2000. We moved to Idaho and we were active in our church. He taught Sunday school. I taught Sunday school. We went on mission trips. And then one awful day, the day of discovery, happened where my world shattered. And I was faced with the reality that my husband was a sex addict, that he had kept, as you said, the secret basement from Dr. Omar Manwala hidden and compartmentalized a double life. And so he was addicted to pornography and he confessed an affair that he had been having for the past year. And so we had a 2-year-old
Do you
little
mind
boy.
if I ask how you discovered that? Was it
Actually, he confessed it. We had moved into our home in 2006, and shortly thereafter, his best friend had committed suicide, and he fell into a deep depression. And so, for about a year, that's what I thought he was struggling with was depression. And so, we got pregnant in August. We had our child on June 1st, and my husband continued to just be isolated and in this depression and grief. So I just looked at my employer, you know, guide of, okay, what counselor could I use? And it was a God thing because I ended up finding I asked for a Christian counselor and one that specialized in grief. And so they gave me the name of the counselor would be covered. And that counselor ended up being a CSAT. Now,
What
which
is
is
a CSAT?
certified sexual addiction therapist. At the time, I didn't even know what that was, nor had I asked for that. I asked for a Christian counselor with grief. So we walked into that appointment, and within 30 minutes, that counselor had it out of my husband, the confession out of my husband. He said
Wow.
to him, most men that are struggling with depression or grief are most likely keeping a secret. And then he went on to say, and I sat there and I remember even rolling my eyes thinking, this is ridiculous. We know it's the grief from his best friend. And so then he went on to say, most often secrets with men are sexual. And so then he just asked the follow up question, have you ever looked at pornography? And so my husband admitted that at the time, yes. And
Was that news to you?
yes,
You had
my
no
world
idea.
shattered. I was completely shocked. I had no idea. I had no idea. And the counselor looked at me and he could tell I was completely shocked. And he stopped the session, actually. He asked, he said, did you know this information? And I said, no, I had no idea. And so he ended up stopping the session and he asked my husband to make a follow up appointment and me to make a follow up appointment. And so we left that session and I was just devastated, absolutely devastated. I didn't know the extent of it. I didn't know the frequency of it. I had no idea other than he just admitted in a counseling session that the secret was sexual. So it was later that night, I just started asking him more questions. Tell me more about this. We'll put something on our computer. We'll take care of this. And in my mind, I'm like I said, my background is sales, and I'm just like, we've got a problem. I'll fix it. Let's get this figured out. And he just looked at me and said, it's so much deeper than the computer. And I just thought, what? And something in me just said, well, have you ever cheated on me? And then it was that silence. It was that felt like a minute. I'm sure it wasn't, but it felt like a minute of silence. And then he put his head down and he just nodded. And I mean, the world collapsed. The world collapsed in that moment. And I had no idea. He'd been having a year-long affair with the woman at work. And so that began our journey. I went in to counseling the next day. I went to see my pastor's wife and I had my follow-up appointment from just having a baby. So I had to sit in front of my doctor and have to ask for an STD check. And I sat there holding my pastor's wife's hand and I just had tears rolling down my face. It felt so humiliating. And I could remember my doctor looking at me and she said, I can't even imagine your husband doing this. He was so attentive with all your appointments and at delivery. And, she was just as shocked as I was. And it's that moment of discovery that stands in your mind forever. And it's kind of that time where you remember before D-Day and then what after D-Day. That's always kind of the time frame where you categorize your life, So for me, mine was July 12th, 2007.
Wow.
So,
we have a little bit in common, the depression. My husband was just this black cloud was over him all the time. And the fact that I had no idea. And did you find yourself doubting yourself? I mean, you didn't even notice. I felt the same thing.
yeah, you doubt, how could I have been so stupid? How could I have not known this? What were the signs? I mean, I can remember that night we paced the kitchen for probably 3 hours and I just was asking all these questions like, well, how did you pull this off? When would you meet with her? How did you communicate? Like all these questions that just in my brain, it didn't even make sense that this could be possible or that this could be the man that I was married to. And this was the Sunday school teacher and the guy, collecting the offering at church and being on the leadership team. It's just all these things that your reality, you can't grasp what the reality is in that moment. And so then it was the journey after that of starting counseling. And back in 2007, I think it was my very first appointment individually. The counselor, who was a CSAT, looked at me and he said, addicts marry addicts. You are what we call a co-addict. And I am going to recommend that you start a 12-step of codependency group.
Jeez. How did that feel?
It was one of those out of body experiences. I thought, what am I a co-addict of? And I had never even heard the term codependency. And to just be labeled that, it made me feel like I was taking part of the blame, that I was somehow responsible for enabling him to act out and to keep this secret. And that was standard of care back in 2007. That's what the sexual addiction world knew. Back then, they did not understand betrayal trauma. I never heard the term betrayal trauma. I never heard a word like abuse, integrity abuse. We were in marriage counseling. So I would go to my individual counseling. We would do marriage counseling, and I would do my group therapy for the 12 steps of codependency. And we did that for 2 years, and it was exhausting. And then there was another relapse. And so I immediately went to see a lawyer to separate and started the paperwork. And then my husband talked me into trying one more time and trying a biblical intensive counseling program down in Colorado. So it was a 10-day course that we went to, very expensive. And that shifted the focus less from addiction and more to this is a sin issue. And so that program was all about, just getting right with the Lord is going to fix this. And so my husband at the time, when we got back from that, we decided to continue working, that we had a new goal, new focus. And so we quit all of the counseling. And he just started meeting with different pastors at church and different men in the church. And that went on for 10 years. I would periodically meet with women at church. If the pastor's wife became aware of someone that was struggling with addiction in marriage, I would meet with the wives. We would go out to coffee. I would encourage these women to get counseling, to get help. All of the things back then were focused a lot on being a better wife, submitting more, respecting more, giving more sex. Everything it felt like it was put on the partner to fix the husband. And again,
it must have been something you did that made him not satisfied.
It was something that I was doing or not doing that led him to look at pornography or to go outside of the marriage, which none of that is correct. So that is why it is so important that these advances have been made in the sex addiction world and in the betrayal trauma world, and that you find a counselor or a coach that is informed, trauma informed. And that is why I do what I'm doing now. Is I want to be that person that I needed back in 2007. Because if my story continued and I stayed in my marriage 10 more years and would deal with relapse after relapse and trying harder and harder until 2016, he confessed another affair. And this time I went to a different counseling group, and the counselor gave me the book, Your Sexually Addicted Spouse by Dr. Barbara Steffens and Marsha Means. And
I've heard those
she
names.
is the founder of apsats. She coined the term betrayal trauma. And I read that book, Teri, and it gave me a vocabulary to so much of what I had experienced in that decade, and realizing that it was trauma and that it wasn't my fault, and that I wasn't a codependent and I wasn't a co-addict. I was a betrayed partner dealing with the impacts of trauma. And that was such a relief to read a book like that and to have a different terminology and a different mindset. And I realized that what I was doing all those years was seeking safety, that my safety was gone. And my story continues. We ended up, I divorced him. In Idaho, you can be divorced in, I think it's 28 days. And I read that book and I thought, I am not safe. I do not trust him. How could this have happened? This was my line in the sand if he ever had another affair. Right. And so I divorced him out of seeking safety. However, that trauma bond and that attachment is still very much there. And I said to him, I am willing to reconcile, but I need to see healing on your part. I need to see what you will do, what you choose to do on your own, and I will watch from the sidelines. And so I did divorce. We divorced. but we were very amicable. I started a Betrayal and Beyond group and counseling.
What is that?
So that is a group. The ministry is called Pure Desire Ministry, and they have groups for men that are called the 7 pillars, and they work with men that are sex addicts. And then the women are a part of a Betrayal and Beyond group. And so these groups offer support. They offer education about sex addiction, about betrayal trauma. And for the women, anyway, the Betrayal and Beyond group, it's about a year program. So I started that, and then he began a 7 pillars group, and I watched him make what I thought were incredible heart changes and behavioral changes. And about 6 months later, he said, "Would you be willing to consider reconciliation and therapy for us as a couple?" And I agreed to it. And so we did that for a few more months, and then
Let me ask you this, Bridget. So, how much of that do you think was due to the fact that number one, you had children together? Number two, you had been married and you had an expectation that that was something that you would be forever under God in the church? How much of that was expectations and how much of that was hope? What do you think?
I think the majority of that was expectation and
Yeah.
wanting my family to be whole,
Yeah.
wanting to honor God in the way that I thought was most honoring, which was to save my marriage and to redeem this marriage. And that's what I had done for a decade. I mean, I had wanted to do it all I could to save my marriage and to keep my family whole for my children. And, we're taught in the church that divorce shouldn't even be discussed. That was a mentality that I had going into marriages. Hey, divorce isn't even an option. We will do anything we can to put our marriage first. And I didn't realize at the time that I believe I put my marriage on a pedestal, on an idol. I made marriage and staying marriage an idol in my life. And I thought God would be more satisfied with me if I was married to my husband than if I chose divorce. Even if the divorce was not what I wanted or my fault. But that was my unhealthy way of thinking.
Yeah.
And so even in the reconciliation, it was an unhealthy way of thinking that I was only healthy if I saved my marriage.
Yeah.
And if we redeemed our marriage. And we got remarried then that summer. So we got divorced in 2016. We got remarried July 1st, 2017. It was a day of tremendous hope in my heart and in my mind. And I thought, this will be an amazing redemption story for the Lord. And I really was so hopeful. I walked down that aisle and I had tears going down my face as I walked down the aisle. And I had both of my boys escorting me down the aisle. It was a backyard wedding, and it was beautiful. I thought, this is what hope is about. And so we remarried. And Teri, within a month of remarriage, I caught him in more lies.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
And it was devastating. And began then a year-long process of finding more lies and realizing behaviors that weren't lasting. But I would sit in my counselor's office week after week, and she would say, "Bridget, how much more are you willing to take?" And I was determined. I said, "I have put my children through a divorce already. I will not put them through another divorce. I can take anything. I can handle this. God will see me through." And it got progressively worse. And she started using the word domestic violence. And that was so confusing to me because in my head, I only thought domestic violence was physical abuse. And I said, no, no, I'm not in a physically abusive marriage. So week after week, she would gently use terms within the domestic violence chart. She would pull out the power and control wheel. She would talk about emotional abuse or verbal abuse, spiritual abuse, financial abuse, sexual abuse. And it started making sense. And I started realizing some of the things that he was doing were definitely abusive. And it continued to escalate and escalate to the point where he was checking my phone all of the time to see if I was having an affair. He became very obsessive and controlling and paranoid. At one point, he threw out my yoga pants and told me women don't wear yoga pants. He did things like that. He would tell me what to wear and what I couldn't wear. He controlled who I talked to.
Wow.
He escalated
Yeah.
and each week my counselor would say, how much more are you willing to take? Until I realized I could not take anymore. When the control got to the point where I realized I don't have a voice. I don't know who I am. I don't even know what I want or what I need. I am living in fear. And I felt completely depleted and hopeless and in despair. And I reached a moment where I realized I cannot survive anymore. I can't be the mother that I'm supposed to be. I certainly can't be the wife that I wanted to be in this environment. I'm not the friend. I'm not the daughter. I'm not anyone that I should be. I'm not able to be. And I made a decision. I had a few close friends and my parents, my siblings that knew what was going on. And finally, one day that the counselor said, I think you need to go to the Family Justice Center.
That's the shelter.
Uh-huh. It's a domestic violence. It's not a shelter per se. It's an organization in Nampa. We have a building downtown Nampa. And so I walked in and I even said to the lady, I'm not really sure why I'm here, but my counselor told me to come. And so they pulled me back into a room and they began to talk to me and they began to ask me questions and basically give me a safety assessment. And that led to 2 or 3 more visits because I still didn't know what I should do or what I was willing to do. They had the police talk to me. And finally, the police officer said, with all that you are describing, ma'am, I do not feel you're safe. And they talked to me about a protection order. And I can remember saying, you can't do a protection order. He is going to get so mad. And so they gave me the book, Why Does He Do That? Inside the Minds of Angry and Controlling Men. It's by Dr. Lundy Bancroft. And so that police officer escorted me to my house, told me to pack a bag. I got in and out of my house in 5 minutes. My children were safe back in Illinois. They were staying with my parents for a week on vacation. And I fled. And I went to a safe couple's house, actually my Betrayal and Beyond leader.
Wow.
And I read that book over the weekend, and the scales just fell from my eyes. And I realized I am married to an addict. I am married to an abuser. And also within the last few weeks there, my counselor and his counselor and another doctor, a medical doctor that had been in my Betrayal and Beyond group for 2 years, they all on the same day said, Bridget, we believe there's a personality disorder as well.
Wow.
And so it was this storm that I realized I cannot stay in this anymore.
Yeah.
I will die. And that's really what I felt emotionally, spiritually, mentally. And so I went on Monday back to the Family Justice Center and they helped me to write out a protection order and filed it. And then I had to go back 10 days later and stand in front of a judge and basically plead my case. And my husband pleaded his case. And
he was in the courtroom with you.
Yes, he was pleading his case for why he did the behaviors that he did. And he did not believe that they were abusive. And the judge let him know otherwise. And so that judge, you could get a 3-month, a 6-month, or a 1-year protection order. And that judge granted me a 1-year protection order. And that was another thing to walk out of that courtroom and just sit in disbelief. Like, how did I get here? And what are my children going to think? And what do I do now?
What was the reaction from your pastor, from from that part of your support group? Were they supportive?
They were supportive. They were. My pastor's wife, actually, so that was on a Monday when I filed that protection order. My husband at the time called the pastor that night and asked for an emergency meeting Tuesday morning. He had not been served yet, the protection order, but this was what he often did was, part of his repentance was, oh, I'm going to go meet with the pastor. And so the pastor's wife called me on that Tuesday morning and said, I'm curious your side of things. Pastor met with your husband this morning. And I just said over the phone, I cannot do this anymore. I have tried and tried, and I will die if I stay. And I said, I don't have to have your support. I don't need it. I know what I need. because I was afraid they were going to say, because there had not been infidelity the second time, you don't have a biblical reason. I don't know. In my brain, that's just where I was going. And she said, Bridget, we support you. We have seen this play out for over a decade. You have tried, and we will fully support you with what you need. And the pastor even was willing to testify in court months later when we thought we were going to be going to a trial. So I did have the backing of my pastor and his wife, and they asked my husband at the time, let him know that he was no longer able to come to that church, that he would need to find a different church, but that church was going to be a safe place for me and my children.
Wow.
So I did have their support, but I got to the moment where I didn't need it and I wasn't looking for it. And I don't know before that I would have felt that way, because I think during that decade where I was trying, I was constantly under the authority of the church. And I don't believe that anymore. I believe I'm under the authority of the Lord, and I am accountable to the Lord. And the Lord sees me and loves me. And my worth is not based on if I am married or not.
Right.
My worth comes from Jesus and what he did for me and his Holy Spirit that lives in. And so that was a shift in my thinking and in my healing journey. And so we were divorced about 9 months later. It took about 9 months to go through all of the different, I don't want to say trials, but there were different court cases that he would violate the protection order, and then he got a no contact order, and then it ended up right before that one no contact order was up, or the protection order was up. His probation officer called and said, I think you need to extend it. He's very unstable, and signs that he thinks as soon as this is over, he's coming back to your house to win you over. And she said, you need to extend this for your safety. So that was another year of extending, and another time standing up in court. And, it's a lot. You think back at, at all the traumas that there were. And the trauma of divorce is very real as well. You've got the betrayal trauma, and then you've got the divorce trauma, and you've got a high conflict divorce trauma. And so all of that comes into play. But I stayed in counseling. I stayed in groups. I joined a divorce care group, and I did that program. And then I eventually led a divorce care group. And then fast forward 7 years. And as I had some time off, I paused my career. My son had a baby, and I thought, I'm going to stay home with my grandson. And it was during that year that I just honestly was holding a baby, experiencing peace and joy and restoration that I never felt, that I just had a lot of long talks with the Lord and just said, what do you want? What do you want with my life? Make purpose out of this journey that I've been on. And that's when I felt the Lord saying, you're ready. You can do something with this story. And so that's when I started taking coaching classes and learning how to walk beside a woman. I mean, I have done this journey myself, but how do I get the tools that I need to walk beside someone and to sit with them in their pain, to give them the tools that they need, to validate them, to help them find clarity. And so that's the story of how I got here and what I'm doing with this journey and with the pain. And it's a different redemption story. I thought that my redemption story was back in 2017 when I remarried my husband.
Right.
Then my redemption story. Yes, but then my redemption story became, you know what? Look at me. Like, I'm growing in my wholeness, in my oneness, and I'm creating a whole different mindset and perspective, and one that I think is more aligned with God and his heart for me as his daughter. And, that was redemption. And then 2.5 years ago, I met a man in my neighborhood, walking down the street, and I was pushing my little grandson, and he was walking his daughter's dog, and we struck up a conversation, and we just married 6 months ago. So that's another redemption story, So it looks different. Yes, Teri, that's why it took me 5 years before I would ever even consider dating.
Wow.
One of the impacts of betrayal trauma is you lose your confidence. You lose your ability to, do I know what a red flag is? Am I going to see what it is, and you lose trust in all men. I mean, I thought every man's addicted to pornography. Every man has secrets. There are no safe men, so those are the things that held me back. And I really was just pouring into my kids. My boys needed me, and I had a very stressful job that kept me very busy. And so I was content and going to work and taking care of my kids and getting them to their ball games and doing my group and doing my own therapy and developing just amazing friendships and support groups with women. And I call it my mom tribe. I mean, to be a single mom, to have two kids in middle school and going through high school and getting them to all their sports activities. I mean, I developed a mom tribe, just a group of women that show up and are there and help you.
Yeah.
And, I'm so thankful for all of the people that have walked with me and supported me in different ways. And, I really discovered peace and wholeness and joy and even comfort to be able to be in my own home and to be comfortable and not walking on eggshells. And I was happy and I was content where I was. And that's why I thought I don't need a man.
It would be sort of fairy tale-ish for us to expect that your life now is perfect and you've gone riding off into the sunset with your knight, who, from everything I've heard, is fabulous. But in what sense have you been marked by your trauma? And in what sense do you, like, okay, Paul, the Apostle Paul, had a thorn in his side that he carried with him for the rest of his life that reminded him of his need for the Lord. Is that a good sort of comparison for your experience?
I think that is. I do, because I have a scar. I have a very deep wound that I think there was part of me, a part of my heart on July 12th, 2007 that died.
Your innocence.
Yeah. And there are so many losses to grieve. Even just recently, I sat down and just made a list of all the losses. And there are so many losses. There are so many losses that happen with betrayal trauma. There are so many losses that happen with divorce. And I know you know this, Teri, but my ex-husband unexpectedly passed away last March of a heart attack. So there's another loss that my boys have. And so there are so many losses in life. So to say that, there's this perfect redemption story, it doesn't exist, because this is life and we have pain, but we have hope and we know growth and we do know redemption. And we know that life exists beyond that wound and beyond that scar. And God takes our pains and our heartaches and he uses them for his purpose, for his glory, and to pour into other individuals. And that's what we do. And that's where I feel like going forward, I have that passion. I have a compassion for women going through this journey, because I did it. I went through it, and I can sit with them in that pain and I understand it. And the human part of me sits often with them, and I'll have tears in my eyes, because it's painful. It's sad, but I also know that healing is possible and that you don't stay in that place forever. And that's what coaching does. Coaching moves us forward, or counseling. I did years of counseling. It's there to move us forward. It's there to establish our safety again, our identity, worth, our outlook on life. It's there we can find our joy again. We can find hope, because our hope is external. Is not, I should say, is not external. Our hope is internal. It's not in our circumstances, but it's in our relationship to God, our relationship to others. We were made for connection, and we heal when we are connected. And that's why, even as a single woman for the last 7 years, I had connection with other women. I had connection with moms, with friends that started girls' trips after I got divorced. We called them our therapy trips. I had connection in small groups with my Sunday school class. I had different groups where I sought out connection, and that's how we heal. And being married now, there are other wounds that I didn't realize were there that would need healing. And I have only found those through being married. and connected to a safe, loving person who can sit with me in a trigger moment and say, "You're safe. I love you. What do you need right now?" And I wouldn't have had that staying single, because some of those triggers I wouldn't have even realized. Some of those wounds behind that trigger, I didn't even realize were still there, or were messages that I still believed.
So, Bridget, talk to the partner, because it could be, I guess it could be a woman, it could be a man, but they are still in that relationship. They are confused, they are angry, they have not made a decision whether to stay or whether to go. They don't have, they're isolated. They don't feel safe. Talk to that person.
The biggest thing, I think, is connection. It's to get help and to find help, even if it's one person that can hear you, that tells you you're not alone. You're not crazy. You're not the cause of this. And I would encourage you to find a counselor or a coach, a support group. I think a support group is crucial in the healing process. When you can sit in a room with other women that are walking the same painful journey, they understand and they can validate without any shame. Our stories bring shame, and we isolate because we feel shame and we feel embarrassed. Nobody wants to share with friends the addiction that they just discovered. I know I certainly didn't, but to find that safe group of women and your safe counselor or coach to sit with each week and to process, that is healing, because we heal in connection and we heal when we feel safe. And so walking with a group or with the counselor or coach, you start identifying, what are the areas that I'm not safe? Physically, emotionally, relationally, financially, and what is it that I need to get safe? What small step do I need to take today to get closer to safety? What can I do today to care for myself, to give myself self-care and self-compassion? And things like journaling, going for a walk, talking to a safe friend, praying, listening to music, meditating, breathing, deep breaths. You know, we have to calm our nervous system. When women are in a marriage where there is betrayal, their nervous system is dysregulated. It can get stuck in that overwhelmed state. It can get stuck in the freeze and numb out state where you can't hardly get out of bed. You are dysregulated. And so that's one of the key things too. In apsats, they have 3 phases. They call it the safety and stabilization phase. So that's your crisis management, your safety assessment, finding out, what do you need? What boundaries might you need to put in place to have safety? And then it's step 2 is your grief work. So it's realizing, this is my new normal. This is my life. What does this look like? How do I grieve this? How do I accept this? And you're going to have sadness and anger and bargaining and all of that that goes with it. And then lastly is that 3rd phase, where it's reconnection with yourself, with others, making meaning and purpose out of your journey. But the important thing for a woman that is just discovering this is to get that safety and stabilization and get help, find support.
I think the biggest thing I got early on from my support group, I believed so many lies, and chief among them was that it was my fault. And I had a perception of myself that I was as attractive as, remember the character Throw Mama from the Train? I truly felt like I was that attractive to my husband. I went to my first support group, and these women were beautiful, and they had all been rejected and mistreated by their husbands. And I thought, if they could be treated like that, maybe it's not my fault. Maybe it wasn't motivated by me. And so I saw that, and I began to parse through all of those messages that I had gotten and become less confused.
Yes.
So it was invaluable.
Yes. And that's one of the things we say. So now I lead Betrayal and Beyond groups. And that's one of the things we say right away is, hey, we are not here to save your marriage. If that happens, wonderful. If that doesn't, wonderful. If it's not a safe, healthy marriage. But we're here to help you heal, to help you find healing. to help you find hope. And we're not here to save your marriages.
Right.
We're not here to fix your husbands. We are here to focus on us, the betrayed partner, and it is not your fault. And his addiction has nothing to do with you.
Yes.
And that is a really hard one for women to wrap their brain around too. Because like you said, you think, I'm not good enough.
Right.
I'm not pretty enough. I didn't do this enough. I need to look like that. I need to, all of these, I need, I should. And those are lies, because his addiction started somewhere, typically
before
at an early age. Sometimes age 4, 5, 6, 7 years old, 12 years old, somewhere the addict learned to cope with their emotions and to find pleasure in a sexual way. And they kept that hidden. And it's not about you. And that's, I think, one of the biggest things that come out of full disclosure is women realize this started way before they met me. It is not my fault.
Yeah. Well, Bridget, thank you so much for sharing your story. I think that it's going to really touch a lot of women who are in a lot of pain, and encourage them. Hopefully they'll reach out. We have resources on the website, https wheretofindbread.us, and certainly you can go to the apsats website. We have a number of different options for getting connected with people, but we're going to stop this conversation, and you'll be our special guest for episode 6, which we will continue right after this. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Teri. Thank you.